freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with
deep appreciation for the blessings of freedom that we know in this great land of ours, I'm Dr. George Simon, welcoming you to another edition of Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that is plaguing much of the world and responsible for so many of our problems, and having a discussion about it and what we can do about it. And if you want to join the conversation, the number to call is 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. If you want to join the conversation and share with us your experiences living or working with someone of impaired character, someone whose behavior makes you a little crazy, somebody maybe who makes you feel crazy because they have you thinking that there's something wrong with you, but you know that there is something wrong with them. At any rate, if you want to give us a call, once again, the number to call is 718-717-8296. Have an interesting series of posts that have just begun on the website, on my personal blog, Dr. George Simon's manipulativepeople.com. That's at www.manipulative-people.com. And this series of articles is going to be on the liars among us, and especially the art of the lie, the many, many devious ways that people can deceive and go about deceiving, especially in relationships. And that is the topic of the current series of articles. And it will go for the next few weeks. So I invite you to mosey on over to the blog site at www.manipulative-people.com and avail yourself of the many helpful articles there. And I also invite you to mosey on over to the website that I also write for, that's based in the United Kingdom, a great website, Psychology, Philosophy, and Real Life, at www.counselingwith2lsresource.com. That's counselingwith2lsresource.com. And I write articles once a week for that blog site as well. And so you can avail yourself between the manipulative-people site and the counselingresource.com site. You can avail yourself of literally hundreds of timely articles on how to understand and deal with the most frustrating, the most disturbed, the most difficult characters in your life, and how to empower yourself in your relationship with them. Also, you'll find some timely tips on where to go for help, not specifically where to go. I must tell you that of all the hundreds of emails that I get every month, I would say on average I get 20 or so requests a week for the exact same thing. And that is, Dr. Simon, where can I find a therapist in my area who, A, gets it with respect to this character problem that I've been dealing with in my partner or this person at work or whatever the case may be, and B, how do I make sure that I get the right kind of help, that this person doesn't snow the therapist, doesn't manipulate the therapist, doesn't do that game of impression management that we know disturbed characters are so good at, and thereby manipulate the situation and things don't get better. And I always have to respond that long ago it proved impossible for me to maintain a roster of referral names, even when I was doing primarily training workshops for professionals. I didn't go about the process of certifying and keeping a record of therapists who endorsed the perspective that I was advancing, and who kind of got it with respect to character disturbance. It was just impossible, besides which, even if I were to have attempted that, many times people will, come to a workshop. Professionals will come to one of my workshops. They'll be impressed or swayed at the time. They may think, yes, this is exactly the perspective I need to work with the problems that I'm seeing in my practice. But then because they don't have great familiarity with the techniques and because they've only been to a workshop or two, they fall into other habits or fall into old patterns, or maybe even they change their mind. So it would have been very impractical for me to keep a list of folks, even those who had attended workshops and who had indicated that they really found the perspective that I advanced useful. It would have been very difficult to keep a roster of professionals. So people ask me this all the time. Like I said, an average of 20 times a week, I'll get folks asking the same question. Where can I get the right kind of help? Where can I find somebody in my area who gets it, understands what I'm dealing with, and is prepared to intervene in the right kind of way? And I just have to say, I'm sorry. It's been impossible for me to keep a referral roster. And the best advice that I can give is to find someone not only who professes to be well-versed in understanding and treating and assessing personality and character disturbances, but also someone who has a demonstrated track record, who's got a good word-of-mouth reputation for working precisely with disturbed personalities and characters. And on top of that, it's a good idea to seek someone who, rather than adopting a traditional insight-oriented psychotherapeutic approach, adopts a more cognitive behavioral framework. By cognitive behavioral framework, we're talking about the ways that a person thinks that prompt and influence very greatly the ways they behave. This is the heart of cognitive behavioral therapy. We know that, for example, I'll give you an extreme example. We know that folks who actually do believe, they really believe in their minds, that they will, as a result of dying a martyr, go to heaven and be blessed with the company of 30 virgins that they can have their pick of. We know that if somebody believes that, and if they also believe that infidels are expendable, and that there's no injustice in taking the life of a non-believer any which way you can, we know that if a person truly believes this, then they are likely to act in certain ways that most of us in the free world, in the civilized world, would find very risky, very unacceptable. So how we think, what we believe, the attitudes that we really hold, not what we profess, that's the important part, not the things that we profess, but the things that we truly in our heart of hearts believe. Those things predispose our actions. I make this point, by the way, for those of you in the audience who may be of the Christian faith. I make this point in the Judas syndrome. I make this point because a long time ago, there was an argument that hasn't ceased to this day among the first apostles. Actually, between the 13th apostle, not one of the original 12, and one of the original 12. It was an argument that rages still today, with two different camps, aligned with two different philosophies. One camp saying that all you had to do is believe. All you had to do was believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God and paid the price for your sins with his death. That's all you had to do, and you were saved. And by that, meaning you were put in a right relationship with God. You were justified in his eyes, as the people of that time used to say. So that was one camp. That was primarily Paul's theology. Sola fides, by faith alone. And he had a great point. But James the Just, he took issue with those who believed that because of this doctrine, that all you really had to do was profess on your lips. All you had to do was give lip service. All you had to do was basically say the magic words. Say, I believe. I accept. That's all you had to do, and you were saved. And James said, no, not so fast. What you believe is not what you profess on your lips. What you truly, truly believe is reflected in how you act. It's how you behave. If you truly do believe that God in the flesh came down to not just tell you, but show you how to live, and you truly believe that he is the ultimate authority, then it would be incumbent upon you to take his axioms seriously and live them out in the manner prescribed. And what James said is that we betray ourselves and our real belief, our real faith, by our actions. You just cannot have faith without works. So Paul might be right. The faith might save us. But it's not a profession on the lips. It's a demonstration with the actions. How we believe and how we act, they're intertwined. This is the revolution that was sparked within the psychological community several years ago when the cognitive behavior therapy paradigm was born. And a lot of clinicians will say that they use it, they adopt it, they understand it. Many who say that they adopt it and who use it are actually folks who do in practice more quote-unquote cognitive therapy as opposed to cognitive behavioral therapy. They say they do cognitive behavioral therapy, but they almost always forget the all-important behavioral component. And in the behavioral component, and this is probably why I get so many requests every week from folks about finding a therapist who gets it, because many times they will have been to a therapist and they've had this experience where the person, they've gone in, say, with their partner for couples counseling, and the person that they're having an issue with, the person that does all these manipulation things, the person who doesn't take responsibility for anything, the person that's always trying to blame the other person, always has an excuse, is always minimizing, using all the other tactics that I describe in my book, In Sheep's Clothing and Character Disturbance. They will do these behaviors right in front of the therapist and get away with it. And this leads the other party, the victim in this situation, to get really frustrated. And if things don't get any better, then they say, well, you know, this therapy isn't doing any good, and eventually they abandon all hope. And that's because while the clinician might pay attention to some of the thinking errors or some of the cognitive distortions or some of the screwy ways that this impaired character might think, they don't address the behavior. And particularly, they don't address the behavior at the time that it occurs and confront it and correct it and then reinforce the person for changing that behavior in the here and now moment, which is so critical to appropriate cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, by the way, is an enhancement to behavior therapy, which has always proven itself to be a superior mode of therapy when it comes to treatment outcomes. When it comes to change, behavior therapy has demonstrated its superiority over other forms of therapy time and time again. And attending to the cognitive component, attending to the ways people think that predispose their actions is a real enhancement, but the focus still needs to be on behavior. It has to be on what the person does that either is or is not functional. That's where all the therapy is. That's where the change is at. That's when things get better, when behavior changes. That's what it's all about. So therapy that doesn't address that, especially when it comes to persons of impaired character, people with character disturbance, therapy that doesn't address that is just going to miss the mark. Especially therapy that is designed in traditional ways to be insight-oriented psychotherapy, trying to get the person to quote-unquote see, end quote, what they're doing, because they don't really realize it. Well, as I say in my book, Character Disturbance, and as I demonstrate in several articles online at my blog at manipulative-people.com, and as I say over and over and over again at my workshops, when it comes to people with character disturbance, they already see. It's not that they don't see, it's that they disagree. They see they disagree. What do they disagree about? They disagree about the ways to conduct themselves. They feel justified in the way they do things. They think you're off base. They like the way they handle things. They think it's okay to manipulate. They think it's okay to deceive and hoodwink. It's how they get what they want, and they're okay with it. It's not like they don't know they're doing it. As a matter of fact, none of their tactics would work if they didn't know what they were doing. If they didn't know, for example, that you had a huge guilt button and all that they had to do was press it to get their way, why would they do it? They have to know. They have to know you. They have to know them. They have to know exactly what they're up to. If they didn't know, they couldn't pull off any of their tactics. I'm sure, by the way, for you out there who want to call in, I am not sure that our phone system is properly working today. I don't see where the calls have been forwarded, but I'm going to give out the number anyway because I know many of you out there have had this experience that I'm talking about right now. And if you want to share that experience, and if you can get through, give us a call at 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. I'll be happy to take your call. But at any rate, that's where I get so many phone calls and so many emails every week. People asking me, where can I find somebody who gets it? And so I tell them that you want to find somebody who really has a track record and a reputation for working with personality and character disturbances, and who also adopts this kind of approach that I've been talking about, a true cognitive behavioral approach, one that actually confronts and corrects behavior as it occurs, and also confronts and corrects the attitudes and the thinking patterns, the ways of thinking, the ways of looking at things that influence these bad behaviors. That's essential. If the therapist isn't doing that, nothing's going to get any better. And that's primarily why I wrote the book Character Disturbance. It is the phenomenon of our age, just like the title of the book suggests. And in Character Disturbance, I acquaint you not only with all the major types of character disturbances that you're going to encounter out there, all the nefarious characters that you're going to meet, from the slick manipulators to the out-and-out psychopaths, to the narcissists, you name it. They're all in there. Everybody you'd want to meet. What makes them tick? How they probably got to be that way. What's in them innately that predisposes these things. More importantly, I tell you how they think about things. What those screwy ways of thinking are all about. And then I also tell you the tactics that they use to manipulate and control others. And then, as a bonus, I give you a taste of what has to occur in a therapeutic venue for things to get any better. I show you exactly what it looks like when somebody is actually changing for the better in the context of therapy. Therapy today is not like it used to be. We don't deal with the same problems. We don't deal with many of the same conditions that spawned all of our old classic models of psychology. And that's exactly the message I'm going to be carrying to professionals in a series of workshops beginning this fall in all the major cities of the country. I'm going to be carrying the message that they already know, but I'm going to be giving them some tools. I'm going to be sharing with them a perspective that I first introduced back in 1996, and that is nowhere near as novel today as it was, but to some people, it's still new. Because old perspectives really die hard. They really do. And it takes many clinicians who are right out of school, it takes them many years to realize that they probably weren't adequately prepared to deal with what I call the phenomenon of our age, and that is character disturbance. And I'll be telling these professionals, and they'll be nodding their heads. They'll be nodding their heads in agreement. Years ago, when I first started, they were shaking their heads in the negative. But these days, they don't do that. They nod in the affirmative. But I will be suggesting to them, as they already know, that regardless of the fancy labels that we give folks, we might say that they have an anxiety disorder, or we may say that they are somewhat depressed, or, as everyone these days knows, just about everybody gets who's a problem anyway. Anybody who's got some impulse control problems gets labeled bipolar, it seems. It's a very popular diagnosis. And unfortunately, there are some people who really do have this disease. There really are some people who, through absolutely no fault of their own, have got a biological makeup in which something has gone kaflooey. Their neurochemistry is off. And they have these episodes that are either profoundly hyper-accelerated, elated, manic, and episodes that are profoundly depressed. But more often, we apply these labels to folks whose basic character is the problem, whose basic problems reside not so much in the fancy labels that we give them, so that we can treat them and so that we can have a billable code to send to their insurance companies, and so we can have a justification for the medicine that they might be prescribed. Regardless of that, underlying things at the bottom of it all, most of the time, these days, the problem boils down to character. That the person never grew up, that the person never internalized the values, the standards, and the controls necessary to function in a healthy way in their relationships. And I'll say that again because it's really important. And by internalize, I mean we take in and we make it a part of ourselves. This is something that I really stress in my workshops. The process of internalization is not one whereby we recognize that rules and standards and values exist, but we adopt them. We turn ourselves over to them. We make them our own, so to speak. We make them our own. And what we need to internalize are the values, the principles and beliefs, the standards, and the controls that will enable us to function in a pro-social way. And this is what's so lacking. This is what's so lacking, and this is why there are so many problems in relationships, on the job, in government, in all aspects of our lives. I'll give you just one example. One of the prevalent attitudes, one of the prevalent mindsets in our culture, our narcissistic culture of indulgence, permissiveness, and of entitlement, one of the attitudes, one of the dominant attitudes, mindsets out there is a mindset of entitlement. And when people have a sense of entitlement, they are predisposed to act in certain ways. They're predisposed to act as if they ought to be able to do whatever it is they want to do, regardless of what anybody else has to say about it. Attitudes of entitlement come from feeling special, exempt from the rules that the entitled person knows that we want them to adhere to, the principles that we want them to adopt, the standards and the beliefs that we want them to hold. They understand those things. But the entitled individual, the person with that sense of entitlement, thinks, oh, I'm kind of beyond that. I don't really need that. I can get away with this. That's for, as Leona Helmsley, rest her soul, used to say, is for the little people. We special people, we successful, rich, powerful, whatever we think we are, people, we can do what we please. And this mindset doesn't just belong to the rich and powerful. Let me tell you, it belongs to some pretty low functioning folks too. Some folks pretty low on the social totem pole. It's partly a product of our culture. It's not entirely a product of our culture. It's partly a product of our culture, and it's also partly a product of what we don't learn in our rearing. The part of it that belongs to our culture has to do with the bombarding that we have, especially in the media. The absolute bombarding of messages of entitlement that we get in every aspect of our lives. There's hardly anything that has to be earned anymore in anybody's mind. Everything's a right, and everything is easy to be had. Now, I might I might offend some folks here, but an example comes to mind with these free cell phones that were a program, they're affectionately called Obama phones because the program was hugely expanded under Obama, but he didn't start the program. Now, it's really, really nice to have a cell phone. It's really, really nice to have one. Just like it's really, really nice. It's really nice to have a Mercedes automobile or a Porsche. It's really nice. But how did we ever get to think that it's a right to have one? And that if you can't afford one, you ought to be able to just have one. Have other people pay for it. Now, the program was designed for those situations in which there was a genuine need and true disadvantage. In other words, you really couldn't do it yourself, and you had a really pressing need. There are such things. People with severe handicaps, for example, who, if they were trying to lead a relatively independent lifestyle, and they had an accident wheelchair bound, in a remote area. It could be life-saving to have a remote digital device that worked. We understand that. But that's not what this kind of program turned into. It turned into, well, you know, these things are expensive and I want one. Everybody else has got one. So I'll get me one. And guess what? We'll all pay for it. That's just an example. Now, I know I might have offended some people, but it's just an example that came to mind of the kind of entitlement messages that we broadcast and promote 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, week after week, month after month. And should we therefore be surprised? Should we be surprised at all that young folks growing up in such a culture would have a mindset of entitlement? Now, I know I've given this example before. I'll give it again because it's a perfect example. This is one where I have direct familiarity, and I'm going to do my best to keep some names and identities and anonymous here as best I can. Well, some things will just be nameless and titleless. But I did a term, a stint, more like a sentence, in one of the for-profit universities as a professor at the graduate level. At the graduate level, mind you. Teaching an introductory psychology course. Now, a lot of folks come into introductory psychology thinking that it's kind of intuitive and will be one of those easier courses that you can fulfill your requirements on and then not have to worry too much about because it's intuitive and therefore easy. Well, it doesn't take long to find out that that's not the case. But I have to tell you, in this particular institution, this course was made about as easy to pass as any course I've ever seen. All the resources were available 24/7 online. It was very skills and essential skills oriented. There were no hard memorizations of names, dates, and details that really in the grand scheme of things didn't matter all that much as opposed to core concepts. It was very core concept oriented, very basic, and it equipped you. If you just bothered to either show up for class or read the material, you would not only understand the basics of psychology, but you would also, if you went online, you would see every answer to every test question that would ever be asked you. Because the way the course was structured, everything that was going to be important for the test was red flagged. Maybe not word for word, but was emphasized clearly, kind of like an advance alert. You know, this is really important. Get this one down. You know, hint, hint, hint. You might see this exact question or something very close to it on a test, and this is the answer. You know, so all you had to do was avail yourself of this. As a matter of fact, here's even the better part. You could avail yourself of that information while you were taking the test. So it was like everything was open book. only thing was to learn the material. Just know the material. Just acquaint yourself with the material. Expose yourself to it. That's all you had to do. And you would certainly pass. You might even pass with stellar grades. Well, being in the age of entitlement and having a classroom nearly chock full of individuals who came in with a sense of entitlement that all they had to do was register and pay, by the way, with student loan money, not from the federal government. The federal government doesn't have money. The federal government takes money from you. So all they felt they had to do was take your money, give it to the university, and the university would then give them a graduate degree so that they could go out and make lots of money, even if they hadn't learned anything. That's the mindset. That's the entitlement mindset. So these entitled minds did not come to class, did not even familiarize themselves with the material, and even more important than that, they didn't even look at the material or the material that contained the answers to their questions when they were taking their exams. So as hard as it is to fathom, many individuals, many of these entitlement mindseted individuals ended up with scores of 20 and 30%. You know, just purely educated guessing on an exam where all the answers are available, just educated guessing, you'd think you'd do about 50-50. You think you'd do about 50%. But no. This is how much real effort was given by these minds that came to the table with this entitlement mindset. And what's worse, in that entitlement, they were not prepared to accept that I wasn't going to, for their sake, because of their quote-unquote special status, pass them anyway. I literally could not take it. I did not stay long in this capacity. When you see that entitlement mindset so up close and personal, when it stares you in the face, if you've done a stitch of honest work in your life, it's got to rub you the wrong way. And I'll tell you right now, I've had periods in my life where I was a slacker. I've had periods of my life where I had to battle that same attitude of entitlement. And I'm grateful that it cost me and that I had to pay a price and learn better. So I'm not speaking as someone who is trying to tell you that I'm holier than thou. But what I am saying is that when you witness this entitlement mindset up close and personal, if you're a person who has any integrity at all, if you're a person who believes in the value of work and effort and has given anything of yourself to better yourself, has taken seriously to any degree your obligation to make of yourself the kind of person that can make a good contribution, can make a decent contribution, to be a part of making this whole enterprise we call life work and work well, if you're a person of that ilk, that kind of entitlement staring you in the face really has to unnerve you. And it did unnerve me. Now, I can tell you that teachers everywhere face this every day. My experience in this one teaching institution is not unique. I get so many letters and so many emails from teachers. There was a time when I did a lot of workshops for teachers. I think I might do that again. But teachers face this all the time. They face 2 or 3 consistent problems in our age of character disturbance. They face individuals of such character underdevelopment. In other words, they basically have not been raised. Either they have not been raised at all, or they've been raised on the streets and been given a kind of raising that predisposes them to all kinds of trouble. But in any case, they encounter these folks who are so character underdeveloped, that they are simply unprepared to learn. They don't have the mindset. They don't have the sentiment. They don't have the attitude, the receptivity to open themselves up to learning. So teachers face that on a very regular basis. And then the other problem that they have is they face this entitlement. Everybody should pass. Everybody should be equal. Everybody deserves this or that without having to earn it. They face these two things on a regular basis. And my hat's off to those teachers who don't compromise. I unfortunately know all too many who do. I do know, unfortunately, we have some really great teachers out there. But we also have some teachers who long ago threw in the towel, or who maybe didn't have the character themselves even to throw in the towel. Perhaps they gravitated toward the job, perhaps in a low-paying district, because that's just about the only place they could go. That does happen. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not poo-pooing teachers. Like I told you, they face an impossible task in our character-disturbed age. In this age of character disturbance, probably there's no more daunting task than being a teacher in a school, with so many children truly unprepared to learn, not having the right mindset. So there's some real heroes out there. And my hat's off to those who don't compromise and who stick to the guns and stick to their guns and who don't succumb to pressure from either administration or from parents. I'll go back to the example that I shared just a moment ago, my experience in this for-profit institution. Remember, I told you that this was a teaching position in a graduate program. So you would expect folks studying at the graduate level to have basic skills, like knowing how to read, write, knowing how to speak the language, knowing basic vocabulary. Well, think again. And one of the reasons why these individuals were at one of these for-profit places is they'll take anybody who pays with a government check or a student loan. And unfortunately, many of these individuals didn't have the basic skills that it would take not just to get through graduate school, but to get through life, to have any kind of a decent job, make any kind of decent money. And how did that happen? How did they get into graduate school that unprepared? Well, because somebody capitulated in grade school, in high school, and even in college, in undergraduate school. Somebody passed somebody who hadn't learned whatever the material was. If it was English composition, they didn't learn that. At least not well enough to write. Or if it was mathematics, they didn't learn that. At least not well enough to do the basics. And here they were in a graduate program, totally unprepared, and then still yet expecting, even without doing any work, to pass. How does this happen? How has this happened to us? Think about it. I know there are plenty of you out there listening who know this has happened to us. And I know there are some of you who may be of the age that you've been around long enough to see this decline and saying, what the heck? What happened? Well, what happened is a vicious cycle that I talk about in both my books, especially Character Disturbance. It's this vicious cycle between character impairment and the culture that we live in. Because the more character impaired people we have, the more our culture decays. And the more our culture decays and warps, the more character impaired people we have. It's a vicious cycle. A true vicious cycle. Think about it. Just think about it for a minute. Think about all the institutions that have changed so dramatically. You don't have to pull very many statistics to realize how dysfunctional a family we have become. In the United States, more children are born out of wedlock and to single parents. Some of those single parents abdicating responsibility to someone else in the family, like a grandparent. More children are born and raised that way, or not raised would be the more correct term, than ever before, in staggering numbers. Staggering. And a higher percentage of our population is incarcerated in one way or another than any other free society on the earth. It's just incredible. How did this happen? And I know some folks will tell you that they'll tell you that the reason we have so many folks incarcerated is because we have all these ridiculous laws, and we're putting people away who are really either mentally ill or who are petty criminals and they don't have serious offenses. Maybe they have drug offenses. They're not violent, and so we don't really need to incarcerate them. And what we really need to do is just we just need to change our laws, and we'll get rid of this problem. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is some small degree of truth to that, but that's not the whole picture. The bigger picture is that many of the folks that we have incarcerated who were caught. I see we have a call coming in. We have just a few minutes, so I'm going to have to take it. Hello, and welcome to Character Matters. Hello.
Good evening, Dr. Simon. I enjoy so much your show, and I just would have a quick question.
Sure.
I think you described the age of self-esteem, of excessive self-esteem that is so destructive, because I think we have natural self-esteem. And would you like to explain maybe a little bit, because of all the damage that has occurred now in the society with excessive self-esteem? My opinion is we have enough.
Yes.
We need to teach children sacrifice and hard work and being responsible, and maybe also once in a while a spanking when they're small.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. I didn't take the time tonight, but you know that if you're a reader of my books, you know that self-esteem, inflation, and the attitudes of entitlement go hand in hand. And I have a lot to say in those books about how that happened. And you raise a good point. I didn't really address that this program. But with 3 minutes to spare, I think what you've done is you've just kind of defined for me what the topic needs to be for next week.
Thank you.
So I'm going to, well, you know what? Next week, let's see. Yes, I think you have defined for me the topic for next week. So I will make that a point. I will make it a point to talk about that, because you're absolutely right. And I will talk not only about the cultural aspects of that, but I'm going to talk about exactly how it is that people's self-esteem gets inflated in our day and time, and why it was such a big mistake to foster that notion that nobody can have enough self-esteem.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I will address that, and we'll make that the topic of the next program. How's that?
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the call. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Great point the caller raises, and I wish I'd have spent more time on it. But the point I wanted to make about our incarceration situation is that maybe somebody came in on a petty offense, but maybe that's how they could finally nail them. That doesn't mean that they are just a basically decent sort who committed a minor crime. Most of the time when this happens, persons have done all kinds of things, any number of things that they could have gone to jail for, but didn't get caught or didn't get successfully prosecuted for. And now they finally got something, so they're in. And that doesn't mean that they don't belong there. We've got a lot of folks who violated their probation umpteen times to earn their way into prison. So the fact that we have so many folks incarcerated is more a testament to how severe our character problem is. And with that, I'm going to leave it for this week. I've been on kind of a rant. You'll hear me probably rant again, because this is the defining issue of our time. And I thank the caller for our suggestion.